Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight. We have a very special series of programs planned for you over the coming months, with tonight being our second stop on the Historic Artist Homes and Studios virtual road trip. This virtual road trip is a collaboration between the James Castle House, which is located in Boise, Idaho, the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program, which is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and 5 other participating artist home sites, such as the David Ireland House at 500 Capp Street in San Francisco, California, whose site we are visiting tonight. My name is Rachel Reichert, and I am your guide on this virtual road trip series. I also oversee the James Castle House and am on the executive committee of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program. With me today is Valerie Balint, the program manager of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program. Hi, Valerie. Along with Valerie is Sam Claude Carmel, who is an artist guide at the David Ireland House. Hi, Sam. We also have Lavona Andrews. Hello, Lavona, who will be offering live ASL interpretation during tonight's event. We are excited to bring you into the homes and studios, even if it is virtually, to learn more about 6 remarkable artists and the spaces that supported their art making practices. As you know, or you might know, tonight's tour is a part of a series of tours exploring different artist homes and studios offered monthly through August. If you haven't signed up for the upcoming tours, we will add a link in the chat where you can learn more. So for those of you just learning about the Historic Artist Homes and Studios, also commonly referred to as Haas, this is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which currently is a coalition of 48 museums that were previously homes and working studios of many American artists. Through its support and advocacy, Haas is helping to preserve the nation's legacy of creativity in the visual arts. Their support aims to connect meaningful visitor experiences at all of these authentic creative places. All Haas sites are public spaces, and when it is safe to do so, I hope we can all venture out into the world and visit these incredible museums in person, many of which are beginning to open now. I also highly recommend visiting Haas online to learn more about these and many other homes and studios they support. You can learn more at artisthomes.org by joining their mailing list or engaging with them on various social platforms, all of which we will add links to the chat now. So before we get started, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items. We will have an opportunity to answer some of your questions midway through tonight's tour. So please feel free to send your questions into us through the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We will conclude tonight's event with an opportunity to experience firsthand the David Ireland House through the lens of a more personal inquiry presented by one of their artist guides. Sam will lead us through a guided meditation, asking us to reflect on an aspect of the house, an experience you might have if you were there on site today. For optimal viewing, we recommend going to the top right of your screen and selecting view options and selecting side-by-side mode. Tonight's event will be recorded and will also be made available online in the coming weeks. You will find this and other recordings located at the James Castle House, as well as the Historic Artist Homes and Studios YouTube channels. So because this is a virtual road trip, I'd like to just set the stage a bit with a few travel notes for us to consider before we get started. Last month, we kicked off this road trip in Boise, Idaho at the James Castle House, leaving roughly a 10-hour drive between Boise and San Francisco, California. So this map gives you a good sense of the distance between James Castle House and David Ireland. So when you leave Boise, you will drive through Meridian, Nampa, and Marsing, Idaho before crossing over into Oregon. Following Highway 95 through a sparsely populated high desert southeast corner of Oregon, you will see the Jordan craters and an extinct volcanic field, and the Pillars of Rome, both located in Jordan Valley, Oregon. The Blue Mountain Pass will take you into McDermott, one of few towns in America that shares 2 separate states, which is Oregon and Nevada. Once in Nevada, you will drive through the Humboldt Tyobi National Forest. It's actually an amazing 6.3 million acre forest, making it one of the largest national forests in the lower 48. From there, we will drive by Tulum and Humboldt lakes before driving through Reno and then the Nevada-California border. Once over the border, you will drive through the Tahoe National Forest, down through Sacramento, possibly stopping at Napa Valley for a wine tasting, and then finally cross the Golden Gate Bridge into the heart of San Francisco, where the David Ireland House at 500 Capp Street awaits you. So for more, or maybe even a better understanding of how this space feels upon arrival, I've asked Valerie Balint, who has impressively actually visited all 48 Haas sites and also lived in the Bay Area for many years, to share her experience both in the area and at her time during the visit at the David Ireland House before we start the presentation with Sam. So Valerie, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel, to you and everyone involved at the James Castle House for spearheading the virtual road trip in collaboration with Historic Artists Homes and Studios. I'm excited to have us highlight the David Ireland House this evening to allow everyone to take a step inside this truly unique expression of the integration of life and art that I had the pleasure of first visiting when the National Trust held its 2018 annual conference in San Francisco. During that conference week, I was able to visit the site twice, once with my trust colleagues, and then later in the week when I led a field study trip, which engaged the conservation firm that skillfully undertook the extensive restoration of the house interiors. And you will hear more about that process on our tour this evening. Well, that fall was my first excursion to the Ireland House. I must confess that traveling to San Francisco that October was a sort of homecoming for me. 2 decades earlier, I had spent 5 years in this marvelous city, living in this building at right on the screen in the Pacific Heights neighborhood. Perched atop a series of stamina building hills leading up from the marina area and the foot of the Golden Gate Bridge, what you see on the screen were my daily environs, including the majestic complex of the Palace of Fine and Decorative Arts, originally built for the 1915 Pan-Pacific Exposition. Just west of here lies the former United States Army Presidio complex, through which you can drive up winding tree-lined lanes ripe with the smell of eucalyptus to another wonderful arts institution and one of my favorite haunts, the Palace of the Legion of Honor, where a cast of Rodin's The Thinker greets you in the central court. Like all major cities, San Francisco boasts so many neighborhoods with unique character. From its world-famous Chinatown, to sea lions sunbathing on the docks of Fisherman's Wharf, to Haight-Ashbury, and too many other places to mention here. Each promises its own delights and adventures for residents and visitors alike. And never far away is the water. Bay or ocean, one of the wonders of coming into the city for me was looking out the window of the airplane and having it appear as if we were about to skim the waves of the blue beneath the airplane's wings. Returning to San Francisco in 2018, I made sure to visit for perhaps the 20th time, a site I recommend to everyone, Coit Tower, in the Telegraph Hill neighborhood of the city. In a city in many ways defined by its views, this spot is singular. From the 210-foot tower built in the 1930s, you get stunning panoramas of the city, the bay, and beyond, east towards Oakland and Berkeley, and the city's other impressive bridge, Bay Bridge. Also from this height, a first-timer can orient themselves in one sweep to the city and its architecture, including the tall towers of the Embarcadero Financial District that you see at right on the left image. But visiting here also promises an immersive art experience in every corridor and every stairway. Dozens of murals made by 25 artists tracing the history of the state through the first large-scale public works project, including works by 4 women painters. In some very small way, it reminds me of what happens at the Ireland House. The exterior gives you very little sense of how art will encompass you when you are inside. Various neighborhoods lie south of the financial district in an area of town known as Soma, or south of Market, named for the central avenue that demarks it. Here stands FS Moma, a building that just had opened when I lived in this city and which I revisited in 2018. Designed by Mario Boda and near the lush urban oasis of the Yerba Buena Gardens, this architectural icon is worth a visit not only for its exhibitions and collections, including works by David Ireland, such as the Untitled piece you see at right, but for the power of place the building itself with its stunning oculus window conveys. And south and west of Soma is the Mission District, which is where the David Ireland House is located. Originally named for the 18th century Dolores Mission, which remains as the city's oldest intact building at the northwest section of this neighborhood. Now headquarters to numerous tech companies, the district has strong and abiding Chicano and Mexican-American roots and was a hub for this conceptual art movement in this city. Throughout the Mission are hundreds of murals, first executed in the 1970s and continuing into more present time. This is just one example on the left, the Women's Building, illustrating murals by 7 women artists. A mural tour for any visitor to this part of the city is a must. By contrast, the Victorian Italianate house at right, that of David Ireland, unassuming and seemingly conventional, keeps its wonders hidden on the inside. Stepping into the Ireland House is a bit like falling through the looking glass and into another world, one of Ireland's making and imagination. You will hear about the processes and philosophies that guided this work from our talented guide, Sam, but I want to evoke the first sense of awe that you encounter. You feel like you are in a precious amber and lacquered jewel box. Everything is warm and glowing inside this space. The uniformity of the wall surface lets you take in the objects that punctuate these rooms, but also your eyes linger on the detailed cracks in the walls themselves, taking in patterns and slight variations of color. Everything here makes you question what art can be, what it should be, and it breaks all conceptions of how you define studio space at all. You seem to have been inserted into one huge art installation or directly into someone's psyche. Yet there is also an incredibly intimate and homey quality here as well. I sat at that dining room table and had the pleasure of being hosted by the person who was instrumental in saving this site for the public, founder Carly Wilmans, who you see here at left. Ireland also loves to host people, and the artist guides that work at the site today create an atmosphere such that you are welcomed by one of Ireland's own close friends, sharing his ideas, but also how those ideas inspire them today. It is a vibrant, living tribute to the legacy and one you will all get to experience with Sam this evening. I thank Sam and everyone at the David Ireland House and you, Rachel, as we embark on this journey tonight.
Thank you so much, Valerie. It's such a treat to hear your perspective of these sites and your time in the Bay Area. So I'm going to hand this over to Sam, who again is an artist guide at the David Ireland House, to share more about David Ireland and his house in San Francisco, California.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you tonight. Welcome to the David Ireland House at 500 Capp Street. My name is Sam Carmel, and my pronouns are they, them. And we're so excited to be part of the Historic Artists Home and Studios virtual event and be here giving you this tour. And to start off, I think it would be really short-sighted of us to think that the history of the site that we're visiting tonight starts at the moment the artist first arrived. Before we begin talking about David Ireland and his home, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Ramaytush Ohlone, whose land the site sits on today. We're so excited to introduce you to David Ireland and the David Ireland House at 500 Capp Street. David Ireland was a foundational Bay Area conceptual artist whose art seamlessly flowed from his layered life as a maker, mentor, and explorer. Born in Bellingham, Washington on August 20th, 1930, Ireland always showed an interest in art and was encouraged by his family, especially his mother, who was an actor, to pursue the arts. Ireland began his education in San Francisco at CCAC, which was then California College of the Arts and Crafts, now is CCA. And after graduating, he was then drafted to the US military, where he was teaching soldiers here in the US how to properly use gas masks. After leaving the army, he traveled to Europe and Africa, working as an illustrator and architectural draftsman, later returning to his hometown of Bellingham, Washington to raise a family. The lust for travel beyond small town life eventually led Ireland to journey again throughout continental Africa and Southeast Asia, where his vivifying experiences with the cultures, creatures, and natural elements of the lands he encountered encouraged his eye for material and his physical modes of making. Returning to San Francisco in his mid-40s to continue his arts education with an MFA in printmaking from SFAI, San Francisco Art Institute, Ireland cemented himself as a key figure in the emerging Bay Area conceptual art movement through his collaborations with other foundational conceptual artists and art spaces, expanding the possibilities of artistic practice through his collaborations and friendships with contemporaries and students. David Ireland was hired by Tom Marioni, another important Bay Area conceptual artist, to restore the original Museum of Conceptual Art, MoCA's interior wall back to its previous state, after Darryl Sapien's exhibition left a rectangle of white over the brick wall, hiding the marks of prior activity in the space. MoCA was a museum founded around the idea of the daily acts and practices of life as art, and David Ireland's practice had harmony with this intentional mode of working. Documented by Tom, one of the first processes David undertook at Capp Street was spurned by the sidewalk in the front of his home. He was tasked with repairing it per orders of the city and undertook this work with the same vigor he used in his concrete paintings made in New York a year earlier in 1974. He understood this as a maintenance action, an act that leaves a tangible result but is removed of artistic ego notion. In order to get a sense of the Capp Street neighborhood, I thought it would be helpful to describe to you all the feeling of walking through the neighborhood. The buzz of Mission Street is the first detail one would notice walking to the house. The eye would catch bilingual storefronts advertising in English, Spanish, and Cantonese. With each breath, one will catch the intoxicating smells coming from the restaurant serving Mexican fare. The current demographics of the Mission are centered around its Latinx communities, though the character and composition of the neighborhood is shifting due to the rising rents and gentrification impacting all of San Francisco. Ireland's life and work in his renowned sculptural home pushed the boundaries of what we consider the art. Working through unconventional media, Ireland transformed and imbued materials with new meaning. An iconic example of Ireland's practice are his dumbbells, concrete orgs created by passing wet concrete back and forth between rubber-gloved hands for over 12 hours at a time, in a process of Zen meditation and reflection. David Ireland considered all material to be useful for his art making, recontextualizing the detritus left over from the previous inhabitants of Capp Street into sculptures that consider the physical passage of time and the actions of daily life recorded by material. In jars contained inside a cabinet by the front door of his house, there is soot from his ritual sweeping of the front porch, saved and accumulated as part of a process of maintenance action. Maintenance action being described as a performative gesture of the sculptural remnant. When Ireland bought 500 Capp Street for the now paltry sum of $75,000 in the mission was affordable compared to the rest of San Francisco. The old Victorian in Capp Street was sitting in a state of disrepair and was accessibly priced for Ireland, who had accrued savings from his former San Francisco Cow Hollow-based business, Hunter Africa, importing African objects, including trophy animals, and leading hunting safaris throughout the continent. David Ireland was looking for a place to live and work when he found 500 Capp Street, a two-story Victorian house built in 1886. This corner lot offered many different traits that fascinated Ireland to purchase the house. November 5th, 1975 is a date that Ireland moved into Capp Street, and also the day he called the worst day of his life. Paul Grube left a huge mess, and Ireland got to work cleaning the house, dragging out a heavy safe and punch press that scraped the wood floor. Ireland later put up plaques commemorating the marks left by moving the punch press and safe as permanent features in his home. David Ireland did not conceive of the house turning into the sculpture we know of it now, first opening it to the public in 1978. Ireland was fascinated with light as a medium and glazed most of the walls of Capp Street in amber polyurethane that glows in the daylight and flickers with flame from his propane torch chandelier as it rocks in tandem. After purchasing 500 Capp Street, David Ireland began the process of transforming his home from 1975 to 1978 and what are known as the maintenance action years. The history of this Edwardian Italianate is important and allows us a deeper understanding of Ireland's concerns with intergenerational collaboration in his works. The house was built in 1886. It was originally commissioned to be built by a roofer, Martin C. Walton. He lived here with his family, and after his death, it was passed on to his children, who later sold it to an accordion maker called Rube and his wife. The house was built in 1886 and commissioned by Martin C. Walton. After it was sold to Paul Rube, he maintained his business in living quarters on the ground floor of 500 Capp Street and also boarded tenants in the additional upstairs rooms of the house. He was an accordion maker who sold and repaired accordions in his studio on the first floor of Capp Street, which originally it was 2 rooms and it had a wall in between them until they were merged together for a studio. Across the street, one still can see the gold lettering of the shop window, Accordions P. Groove, that advertised his trade to the neighborhood. The included feature of a studio in the house was a major selling point for David Ireland when he purchased 500 Capp Street. Ireland had been looking for some time for a home that could accommodate his studio practice, and the bones of 500 Capp Street worked for his needs. The space later would become Ireland's home studio and now acts as a white wall contemporary gallery space, and traces of the work David undertook still remain there. There's actually paint on the floor that's splattered, it's like red and yellow paint on this ancient linoleum floor that's still there. That's his remnant in the room. When David Ireland moved in on November 5th, 1975, he was surprised to find that there was still an elderly tenant living at the home, Mr. Gordon. Ireland quickly made arrangements for Mr. Gordon to find a new living situation and even threw him a 90th birthday party at the house. Cake from the party sits still sealed in a jar in a display cabinet in the dining room. It looks pretty gross. Ireland and Mr. Gordon remained friends until his passing. The Victorian at 500 Capp Street holds many uncommon features that predate Ireland's maintenance actions and additions to his home. On a downstairs dining room ceiling, a trace remains of an S-curved wall that once partially divided the room. Upstairs, the curved wall remains, turning one's attention to the hallway behind. Curved walls like these are not an included feature in pre-planned Victorian catalog homes, and it was certainly an expensive and choice addition by Martin C. Walton. In order to achieve the turn of the wall, wood would be steamed and shaped by hand, an incredibly costly and time-intensive process. Walls such as these would be an indication to visitors of the wealth of the builder. The front parlor room of the upstairs hosts these interesting South China paintings. The wicker chairs that Ireland commissioned, I believe in Thailand, and these chairs are painted the iconic battleship gray at the exterior of Capp Street. The windows in this room also had their trim removed by Ireland, an act he called expanding the available view. And so you can see him working on those over here in this picture on the right. What is interesting to note is that this house has gone through a lot of renovations and structural shifts prior to David acquiring it. We see this in the indexical traces of doors and windows patched up and covered over and walls that have been removed. We see many of these traces in the dining room, one of the most vibrant and lively rooms in the house. In addition to these renovations, most likely undertaken during the group's occupancy of the home, the house survived earthquakes and fires that destroyed large portions of the city. We know these moments of structural change because the work Ireland undertook. For Ireland, the house was and is an actor in the broader history of the Bay Area in the late 19th and 20th century that he collaborated with. I want to pause to discuss the idea of conservation, seeing that we are discussing a historic home with a historical home society. The notion of intergenerational collaboration is important in David Ireland's practice and something that the ARG Conservation Services had to consider when preserving the work that is the David Ireland House at 500 Capp Street. They undertook a two-year-long process of stabilizing and preserving the house as it stands today. When they found the house and began this process, starting in October 2013, 5 phases of the project were planned to stabilize and restore the former residence. The first objective was to stabilize the building, primarily the plaster walls, and apply artwork before the large restoration project to improve the building's exterior and basement. Solutions to the moisture infiltration of the building, the exterior paint, window putty, window trim elements, and the roofing system, and repair and maintenance were all included in the plan. The house was very unstable due to the toxic materials that David used, as well as the dugout basement Ireland made for himself. I call it the grotto. It was under the basement. He dug out all of the dirt underneath. There was about almost like 6 feet down there that he dug out, totally undermined the foundation of the house. They ran rigorous and numerous tests to match the urethane walls and floors, and even went as far as preserving the cracked and peeling ceiling in the back office. In addition to this preservation, the house required stabilization after Ireland undermined the foundation. So the house would actually bounce when you stepped throughout the first floor of the home before it was restored. With the help of Jensen Architects leading the reconstruction and stabilization of the basement and garage, the new additions to the home allowed it to be seismically stable and enhanced the home's capacity to be a contemporary art space. And in here, you see those torches pictured. Those actually, they get turned on special occasions, when an exhibition opens sometimes. And at night, they are made to swing back and forth. They're hanging on wire and they swing in tandem back and forth. And so he's got these big jets of flame that just flicker off the amber walls. And actually in the past, the fire department used to drive around the block and just look in the window, and they expected the place to be on fire, but it was just this interesting contraption David made. I love playing with it. It's my favorite thing to turn on in a house. The idea of the house as an actor, a teller of tales, if you will, is emphasized in Constance Llewellyn's book, 500 Capp Street, David Ireland's House. In her narration of the history of the mission, anthropomorphized in The House at 500 Capp Street, Llewellyn allows us to understand that vital and experiencing the home is the history embedded within its walls and the surroundings of Mission District. So when we reopened the home as a gallery in 2016, we had the pleasure to work with many fantastic artists and curators, such as Nayland Blake, who's one of my favorite artists, as well as Mike Kelly, Annika Yee, amazing artists as well, and Tony Matelli, to name a few. We are excited to present the works of our first solo artist in residency, David Wilson, in his exhibition Sittings, opening on May 1st. David Wilson has also been doing a lot of walking. He's going to be distributing scores for folks at the house to use as maps to navigate the neighborhood and discover new sites. He's been spending a lot of time getting to know the neighborhood and at the house to develop site-specific works to experience as you're exploring. And I think now would be a really good time to start the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's such a privilege to even remotely have a little slice of what's happening at the David Ireland House. So for those of you who have questions for Sam or Valerie, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box. I would actually love to start the question and answer section of this. And just to reiterate, we're going to end the Q&A a little early so that we can end the full presentation with a guided meditation on the house. But to kick off our question section, I'm wondering if you, Sam, can talk a little bit more about contemporary programming at the David Ireland House, and particularly the Artist Guide program, and maybe just give us a little sense of your experiences on site.
Totally, my pleasure. It's been really interesting as we've evolved during the pandemic, because before we were all hired as guides to, give tours throughout the house, but the program has been really flexible, and they wanted to make sure that we were all still employed during the pandemic. So we've been developing actually this writing series called The Cabinet, which is on the 500capstreet.org website. And so us artist guides have contributed articles to this space, and also we've been leading our own public programming. I actually gave a talk on Soma and just how that area of the city has changed, and how it was kind of like the holder for a lot of conceptual art. You know, it was one of the main places besides the Mission. And I also talked about, I'm actually starting a gallery in San Francisco. It's called Liminal Space SF, and it's San Francisco's first transgender centering gallery. We're going to open in August. We're just waiting out the pandemic too. But I'm just really thankful to have this job, and it's really been expanding my opportunities and work. And we're also about to really start digging into our archival project here, and that's also something that I have access and ability to do too. I really enjoy the public programming ability, and also just the ability to like develop my like personal like professional skills here, and they're just super generous here.
So as an artist, would you say it's an artist in residence program to some degree?
I mean, yeah, I would say like it's kind of like becoming like for, I mean, are we speaking about Wilson or about this position? With this position, it's kind of developed into like, I wouldn't call it an internship, but it's sort of like it's like professional development for artists. That's what I believe, for emerging artists, and people of different ages work here too. It's like just everybody who, a lot of recent graduates and people who are still in school who are just merging into the arts here. And it's a really great place. Like I know that like this is a really incredible opportunity that's just going to open more doors for everybody else who's working here.
Awesome, thanks, Sam. Okay, so we do have some questions. I'm going to start with one that I feel like anybody who manages a historic artist home site, or maybe even for that matter, any historic house, gets asked this question. Are there any ghosts?
Yeah, there are. I have felt presences here. Not unkind ones, not anything really troubling, but there will be doors that will open and creak sometimes, and it's just like, who's here? Who's hanging out with me today? David had a lot of friends and a lot of really amazing contemporaries of his and his students come through the house. So I'm sure that there's some people who want to come by and pay a visit every now and then.
Thank you for that. Another question for you, Sam, more on a practical, probably more on a conservation, from David's perspective. Why did he remove all the trim in the space?
So he called that his own way of expanding the available view. I think that the trim was blocking the window a little bit, and he just wanted to maximize the amount of light that could come in. But he had some interesting quirks and little things, little additions or subtractions he did to the house, and that was the reasoning behind it. He just wanted even more light, even a couple more inches.
All right, another question for you, Sam. And perhaps you may have touched on this a little bit during your presentation, but can you talk more about how the walls are refinished and why they have such a wonderful golden shiny glow?
Yeah, so the walls are coated in amber polyurethane. Back in the day, David actually used the most toxic polyurethane that was on the market. He just really enjoyed the yellow it made. And so when the house was being refinished, there was actually a lot of different conservational decisions that had to be made, because there's actually a photograph right above the fireplace in the upstairs. It's affixed to the wall by polyurethane. It's a photo of a boat on fire. It's a gift from Tony Labat, and they couldn't remove the photograph from the wall. So they had to work around it, and I think the walls were cleaned and dusted really thoroughly before there was more additional urethane that was added, I think, because over time the the walls were just starting to deteriorate a little bit. It is plastic, that polyurethane is plastic.
Yeah, thank you for that. Another question for you, Sam, which actually is something that I think is important for all of us who are running historic artist homes to talk about, and that is how the artist actually lived in the house. I think it's a really interesting, thing for a person to decide to live a life that was lived in a style in which that house supported. So the question is really about, can you talk about how David lived in the house? Did he have a dedicated bedroom, kitchen, bathroom? And did it always look so tidy like a gallery?
From what I've heard and what I understand from my readings, David was really a particular person. And though sometimes, to some people, his art is like, they're like, is this trash? Like, what is this? And then, they think a little bit further and we talk it through, and then they understand something new about the work. But he kept things, I would say, organized pretty specifically, and he would change and move different installations around in his place. And he did have his own bedroom. Actually, in his bedroom, there's this very heavy concrete painting. It's bright red. It's hanging over his bed, and God forbid there was an earthquake, that piece would have probably killed him. But David was all about precarity. He really was interested in, kind of tempting fate, just like those torches swinging in the window, yeah. And the house today, like the installations change as we have artists that come through, and sometimes the work gets swapped out. For example, an earlier pictured piece, those brooms that were by the curved wall, it's called Broom with Boom. That piece is actually held by Moma's collections in South City, San Francisco. So we have different pieces that come and go out of here, get moved around.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do just want to recenter us all. If you do have questions, feel free to pop those in the Q&A. We are currently addressing questions from the audience. But I do have another question for you, Sam, because we moved to this slide and we were just talking about the things on the shelf in this slide. Could you talk a little bit about what are in the jar, some of these jars?
Yeah, so in that center jar on the top, there's a steak from a cow named Bessie. Bessie got hit by a truck, unfortunately. One of David's friends just hit up David and was like, "Hey, David, do you want a steak?" And he said, "Absolutely." And he just put it in a jar and canned it. And it's been in there since, I believe, like 73 or something like that. It must be putrid if you opened it. We don't. It just sits there. It's its own self-contained little atmosphere in there. And then next to that jar is a check written to the Church of the Little Green Man. And this was a church, an alternative church that was in San Francisco in the 70s and 80s. And in order to gain admission to this church, you have to burn a $1 bill before you can step in the door. And so David has a check in there for $1 written out to the Church of the Little Green Man, which I always think is funny and so interesting. Wonder what that place was like. He also has some of his hair in the jars in that cabinet. And yeah, there's just all kinds of interesting, funky objects that are around. Like he's really into that idea of like deterioration and, material telling time. So I'd love to see what some of these things that have been sealed up forever smell like or look like, but we're not going to do that.
The smell tour of the David Ireland house. So are these the kinds of things that a visitor would find throughout the house, or are they in more specific areas in the house? And then to kind of follow that up, is the entire house open to visitors when you are open during normal times?
Yeah, so David actually has a ton of these different arranged cabinets throughout his house. That's why actually, like, we called our place for our writing the cabinet, because there's just so many of these different assemblages that he has going on. There's some in the downstairs by the front door, some in the dining room. but he really liked to arrange things, and he had several of these cabinets around, then just full of all kinds of interesting things. And we're gonna when we get the all clear to open, I believe that we are opening our show on May 1st is when David Wilson's exhibition opens. I'm not sure if we're starting to see visitors on that day, or I don't think that we might have a virtual opening. I'm not quite sure on that yet, but it's just it's going to be tours that are booked on a online basis. So you're going to go on the Capp Street and make a reservation. And as we were doing tours, basically we had groups of up to 4 people who are of the same household who could go at a time, or 2 people usually of different households if they came. But we just keep the visitation pretty low, and it's pretty limited right now. We wish that we could have more people around, but we just have to have concerns about ventilation and about making sure that it's safe for everybody.
I think we all thank you for that. Let's see, here is a question for you, Sam. While deconstructing the house, do you think Ireland had plans to reconstruct in a different way or leave it bare bones?
I think after his maintenance action time, he was just done. I mean, the amount of physical labor that went into it in these 3 years that he was doing that must have been massive. And I think after he was done with that, I don't necessarily know if he had any other plans for the house, but as he was getting older, and he moved out of the house, I think in 2008, because he just got too old and he was frail. He couldn't really navigate the places as well anymore. He moved out, and then he was just trying to figure out and looking earnestly for somebody to preserve the house, preserve it as a place for history. And Carly, our founder, came here and met him and just totally fell in love with him as a person and the place. And she just was like, I have to make sure to save this for the legacy of San Francisco. So Carly was super generous and swooped in, and she actually I think she was shown by Ann Hamilton, the place. But yeah, I don't think that he was going to transform anything, but it's lucky that his house got really transformed in such a it's not over. I don't think that the house looks too much different than what it did back in the day, but these structural additions that were put into the house have really made it safe. And we also have a really swanky archive room down at the bottom of the house, and there's a garage that we have for exhibition space too. And David, when he has his exhibition, he's going to have the garage door open. He really wants to have people from the neighborhood come by and sit down, have a cup of tea, have a conversation, maybe make a mark on these boards that he's constructing. He's going to make them look amber like the walls in here. And just he's a very interaction driven artist, and he's really generous with the time and care that he gives to people, and he just wants to invite the neighborhood in. So we have spaces like that too here.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, these sites are so incredible for community building. Okay, so a question that anybody who may be conservation minded are maybe dying to know more about, which is how difficult is it to maintain the surface of the walls and perhaps some of these more unusual collections that you have throughout the house?
Well, I can't honestly speak to the maintenance of the walls themselves. We have a cleaning crew that is trained on how to handle a house that comes in pretty frequently every week. But one interesting material restoration that happened here was by Alex Emmer, who's one of our artist guides. She's the lead artist guide here, actually. And there's this copper window that David put in after somebody threw a rock through the window in the upstairs parlor. And Ireland, tempting fate as well, put this giant sheet of copper up and just covered the window with it. And he was a printmaker, so copper sheets are really a big involve part of the printmaking process, but he just installed it there. And over time, the copperworks just started to, take on different patina, in Ireland as a maintenance action for his house would polish it. And after it was sitting for a while, Alex was in charge of doing the restoration work for it. So she spent hours and hours and hours. It took her a long time. Like, I'm not quite sure if it took a month or even longer than that, but piece by piece, she just went through and cleaned it up, and now it's gorgeous. It really glows. But there are certain things that take a lot of care and a lot of different consideration to just make sure that we can keep ongoing in good condition.
I'm sure that that's a bit of an understatement. So another question, more specifically about where David Ireland worked within the space. Did he have a studio space, or was the whole house sort of considered his studio?
Well, so the accordion room basically was David's pop-up studio. So that was a room that people actually really didn't enter. And now it's the first room that people enter into the house. But that was kind of his private place where if he had an idea or had something that he needed to do, he would go down and use that studio space. But I think also he would make work in the grotto under, in the basement. But I think he kind of like use the studio space the most for his art making, which makes the most sense. But I'm sure that like there's other places in the house that he would go and make stuff too, and also with his wax figurines, which are pretty prominent in the dining room, and there's some hanging up in the doorways between the parlors. He would actually sit in a hot car and like twist and mold these shapes out of wax. It's an interesting way to get it to be pliable, I suppose. But yeah, he definitely did work in unconventional places as well.
Another question about the house. Does the house have all of David's artworks that were there when he lived there? Or sorry, artworks that were on view when he lived there?
No, I'm pretty sure that a lot of work was sold as the house was being sold, and so there's different people and different collections that own some of his work, and so we have a lot of the work that was originally here, like Capp Street acquired it when the foundation was created. We don't have everything. Like Moma has some stuff, and a lot of they're just different collections have different pieces that would have been in the house, but those come back into the house periodically because people are generous and they give them to us on loan. But we have a lot of his work.
All right, I actually have a question for Valerie. So how does the David Ireland house fit in to the overall Haas program, and when did it join the program?
So it is one of the newer sites in basically every aspect of how we can define new. As Sam has already alluded to, this home was only recently saved, preserved, and opened to the public, I believe for the first time in 2018. Very shortly after that, they became part of Haas. So they're, I think, it's now 10 new members that we've added, or 12 new members we've added in the last couple of years in the David Ireland house, as is the James Castle house is among those. And I think that in terms of the scope and breadth of what David's house represents artistically, both in his biographical dates, but also in terms of the ethos of the work and the physical artifact that is the house and everything in it. It stands as perhaps, I think I'm correct, the most recent. There's one property that was built earlier, perhaps, or worked on earlier, but the artist only recently died a little after David Ireland. But certainly in the arc of what we consider our nation's art history, this is the most recent point in our artistic evolution in the Haas program. And I think one of the things that I love about this site is his imprint is everywhere. And it just, for those of us who are have spent more time, perhaps like myself, in the 19th century mode or figurative modes, it challenges in a very physical way. I think those things one might have studied when studying conceptual art as an undergrad or grad, but you are now immersed in that. And I think that that's what's really special about this. We hope to get more sites representing the 21st century into the Haas network. This has to do with making sure that legacy happens and people like Carly or other people who are artists themselves preserve the physicality of space. And I think one of the last things I would say about this site, and I was waiting if Sam would say it because I don't want to steal their thunder, but it's really amazing when an artist themselves writes about their intent with the house, and that is preserved. And there is an amazing document that everyone can get online, which is a letter that David wrote to his sister in the form of a book, which really lays out the tenets of his overall philosophy, but also him working on this house. And so you can see where his intention meets manifestation in a way that we don't always get to have. So it stands very uniquely within the Haas network, but I hope won't be the last. I hope right now it's the finish date, but I hope it doesn't stay that way. That's what I would say. I hope someone, I hope we get someone who even eclipses that period and moves us even further into the 20th and 21st century. But thanks for asking that, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. I'm going to just kind of cut us off here at the Q&A section so we have enough time for the final piece of this tour. So with that, I'm going to just say some closing remarks just so we can ensure all of the people who played a role in tonight's tour are mentioned. So again, thank you, Sam, for such an incredible tour tonight. Tonight's tour is brought to you by the James Castle House, which is a program of the City of Boise's Department of Arts and History, the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program, which is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the David Ireland House. I do want to also thank the staff at the James Castle House who have worked very tirelessly alongside Valerie and I to bring this entire program to life. Also, thank you, Valerie, for so fearlessly committing to this program, to the David Ireland House, and of course, again, Sam, for sharing in such delightful detail the David Ireland House. And for all of you who've joined us tonight, for taking time out of your day, hopping onto another Zoom call and joining us, your support does mean the world to us. And if we didn't answer your question or you have additional comments, please feel free to email us. We'll add our emails into the chat here. One last note, so for those of you who are anxious to start planning your own road trips, I highly recommend checking out the newly published Historic Artists Homes and Studios Guidebook, which I have here. It is available online at the James Castle House, along with other online retailers. It's a highly visual guidebook that shares 256 pages of stunning images, artists, and site stories, all grouped by region, basically making it almost impossible for you to drive past any one of these sites on your actual road trip. So we'll add a link in the chat there. I also do want to do a shout out. There is an incredible book on the David Ireland House that's also available online, 500 Capp Street, the David Ireland House. Highly recommend checking that book out as well. So, we do hope that you'll join us next month as we adventure into the home and studio of Vance Kirkland at the Kirkland Museum of Fine and Decorative Art in Denver, Colorado. With that said, I will pass this on to Sam to close us out for a guided meditation. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, so unfortunately, my friend and colleague, Justin Arnagel, who I was working on me with this presentation, actually developed this guided meditation. He can't be here tonight, but I wanted to share an excerpt of his writing from a previous program, Care, Cutler, and Ceilings, which was exhibited virtually very recently at the David Ireland House. And he had to say, David Ireland exploits the moment of pause in his work. This concern in his work has led me to think about the ceilings within his home and how they operate as moments of rest to reflect on one's space underneath. I came to this understanding in line of inquiry while lying on the floor of his bedroom, staring at the green abstraction that is a ceiling you see before him. In this moment of the David Ireland house, I see the potential to allow the moment of pause within a work of art to be generative. That is why I'm asking that you participate in a visually guided meditation with the ceiling from Ireland's bedroom. This is one of my favorite things to do in the house when I'm afforded the time. So we're gonna start this meditation, and I hope that you will enjoy it as much as I do. So first, take a slow, deep inhale. And a complete exhale. Take 3 deep breaths and focus on the image of the ceiling in front of you. As you begin awareness of your breath and the ceiling in conjunction, start to notice what thoughts are going through your mind. What are you thinking about? Do not get caught up in your thoughts, just begin to notice them as they travel across your mind. Let them go as they pass and watch them come and go. Continue to breathe deeply and focus on the ceiling in front of you. Gently guide your focus to the cracks and sensations of breath rising and falling. Where do these cracks take you? Allow your mind to jump. Your mind is free to travel, jumping from place to place. Release the thought, let it fall into a crack in the ceiling as you focus on your breathing. Letting go of expectations and judgments. As the mind wanders away from this image, gently guide your attention back through breath. And we're going to take 3 last deep breaths. Now take a slow, deep inhale. One last deep breath, and then a long, complete exhale. Thank you. That concludes our guided meditation. I'm so grateful and happy to be able to present this to you today, and I hope that I can give everybody an actual physical tour in the future. And it was such an honor to be part of this wonderful organization. You know, like 500 Capp Street is really super excited with our collaboration with the historic artist home and studios, and you know, we thank you all for joining. So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye.